On today's show, the Boston Bruins and Detroit Red Wings, two teams going in opposite directions, and the wild card race is wide open.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome inside this Wednesday, January 8th edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Your team every day. Thank you to all the first listens out there making us a part of your routine. I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Ottawa Senators, alongside Gil Martin from Locked On New York Islanders. We have many of our great Locked On hosts waiting to give you the insight and analysis from what was a wild Tuesday around the National Hockey League. Gil, what perked your attention the most?
So many things, but I think you got to start with the Boston Bruins, talking about a roller coaster ride of a season, and now they are on the downside of that roller coaster, having lost 5 games in a row.
They lost last night to the Edmonton Oilers 4-0. Were outshot 39-26. And yeah, sure, you can point at Connor McDavid getting on the score sheet again, and you can point at the fact that their offense has seemingly dried up. They even had Calvin Pickard go in net, and I found it interesting to note, and Locked On Oilers all over this too, the third time that Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner have shared a shutout. Stuart Skinner left after being run over by Nikita Zadorov, but came back for the second. Good to see that he's okay. But this 5-game stretch for the Boston Bruins is just a thing of nightmare fuel, because under new head coach Joe Sacco, things started looking up. They went on a bit of a streak, but now it's right back crashing down to earth. It was only a few games before this losing streak that the Bruins had points in 5 in a row. They were 4-0-1 over a stretch, but it just feels like the inconsistency is starting to catch up with them.
Yeah, and I mean, very often teams do get an initial bump after they change coaches, and then the key question is, does that continue, or is it just for 3, 5, 7 games, whatever the case may be? Right now with Boston, that inconsistency does seem to be overriding the new coach and the changes that were made.
Minus 10 goal differential in their last 5 games. Boston's got to figure it out. For more on that, here is Locked On Bruins host Ian McLaren.
The vibes are not great in Boston, as the Bruins have now lost 5 games in a row after being shut out by the Edmonton Oilers. This is Ian McLaren of Locked On Boston Bruins, and not only have they lost 5 in a row, but they've lost 6 of 7 games since the holiday break. And it was bad enough on Tuesday that boos were raining down from the stands, and there was actually an audible "Fire Sweeney" chant from the fan base as well, or some of the fans at the very least. Maybe the coaching wasn't the issue after all. The Bruins had turned things around a little bit after replacing Jim Montgomery with Joe Sacco, but again, 5 losses in a row. This team can't score. They're having trouble defending. Yes, it's the Edmonton Oilers. But this is a long-standing trend now, and the hot seat is now being felt at the management level. Catch Locked On Bruins for all the latest.
There's Ian McLaren. Great insight from him. And Gil, I'm looking at the goaltending too. The only thing that Ian didn't touch on, and Jeremy Swayman gets paid after holding out through training camp. He's got an .893 save percentage. Joonas Korpisalo at .892. That's just not going to get it done at the NHL level if you're looking to win games.
No, it's not. And, overall, the Bruins are 25th in the league in goals against. You get the feeling the goaltending isn't great, but the support defensively, not just from the blue liners, but, forwards back checking and picking up their man, that's been an issue also. So goaltenders not living up to expectations, especially Swayman, who, signed the big contract. But you got to support your goalie as well, and I'm not so sure the Bruins are doing that in recent games.
Huge one tomorrow for the Boston Bruins, taking on the Tampa Bay Lightning, who we'll get to more in the next segment when we get to the wild card race. Although, after last night with Tampa winning and Boston losing, with 5 games in hand, Tampa has a higher points percentage than the Bruins, but do trail them in the overall standings by just 1 point. So we'll be locked on to that game for all the analysis afterwards. Make sure you're locked on to the Boston Bruins and the Tampa Bay Lightning. But you mentioned the new coach bump, and it's alive and well in Motown. The Detroit Red Wings win their 5th straight game, beating their division rival Ottawa Senators in overtime 3-2 last night. Patrick Kane, showtime in the power play in the extra frame. And now it's a 5-game win streak in 6 games under Todd McClellan. Loses the first one, and you got to think that initial game, he's just trying to get his bearings behind the bench. But since going out at practice and saying just play hockey, the Red Wings have done just that. What have you seen from them during this surge?
They just seem to be playing with more emotion. They seem to be playing with more purpose. And it just looks like the team is more cohesive. Now, again, you're in that period where you have the new coach bump. So the key is sustaining it. Obviously, they're not going to go 5-1 every 6 games, but if they can consistently win, 2/3 of their games or something close to it, like we said, that wild card spot is wide open. And this comes just in time because the Red Wings were just sort of sinking slowly in the standings before the coaching change.
In their last 7 games before the coaching change, they had 1 power play goal, and you can even extend that back. It was an anemic power play. 2 power play goals over the span of 10 games, Gil. Well, get this. In 6 games under Todd McClellan, the Wings power play is 10 for 19, nearly clicking at 50%. They've got 2 power play goals in each of their last 4 games. Another way where you can boost yourself up. They go 2 for 3 on the power play last night against Ottawa, and that's the difference when it comes to overtime. So good to see that building was rocking Little Caesars last night. They tied it up early in the 3rd period and were able to get the extra point. I'm sure both teams were pushing to get the regulation win with how tight the Eastern Conference wildcard race is right now. And on the other side, we'll dive into that more because the Columbus Blue Jackets are in a playoff spot. Jay Forster from Locked On Blue Jackets, and we've also got Locked On Lightning standing by. Later in the show, we'll hear from John Chick from Locked On New York Rangers. What a season from hell this has been for the reigning President's Trophy winners. That's next. You're listening to Locked On NHL, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are here and better than ever on FanDuel. Right now, new customers who bet $5 can get $200 in bonus bucks guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. I'm also eyeing an outrageous, they call it the absolute no-brainer bet on FanDuel right now for this upcoming weekend. If you go and bet that the Buffalo Bills will complete one pass this weekend against the Denver Broncos, the odds on that were minus 10,000. Well, FanDuel's boosting that to minus 110. It's a max bet of $20, but I mean, if you think they're going to complete one pass, take the $18 on top of that over at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com right now and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back, Locked On NHL, your team every day. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we have local experts on the biggest stories 5 days a week. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. What a night it was in Tampa, and we had boots on the ground. So without further ado, here is Locked On Lightning.
A big win for the Bolts as they snapped their 4-game losing streak with a 3-2 win over the Carolina Hurricanes. Braden Point got the game-winning goal, his 6th of the season, and he leads the Lightning in that category, now 1 point away from 600 in his career. Ryan McDonough also had a big milestone, blocking his 1,934th shot, passing Ron Hainsey for sole possession of 12th all-time in that category. And the Tampa Bay Lightning certainly have some of the NHL's elite players, some of their big stars, And you might not consider McDonough one of them, but he has proven that to be a solid defenseman who just gets the job done, an absolute grinder, and just knows the right place to be. And that's where he gets himself in the way of those blocked shots. And it's the same thing for Braden Point. John Cooper called him gifted, naturally gifted at just scooping the puck up in front of the net and putting it in the back of the net. And that is how the game-winning goal was scored. The Lightning have a big divisional test on Thursday when they take on the Bruins.
There's Josh Sperberg with Locked On Lightning. Absolute beauty. Love that he's at the game covering the Tampa Bay Lightning. And that team with 52 seconds left, they didn't want to see overtime. They saw enough of that all across the Eastern Conference last night. And I mean, to me, it's a matter of when, not if, the Lightning jump into a top 3 spot in the Atlantic and just hold it for the rest of the year. Gil, there's too much talent on that Bolts team to be anywhere but top 3 in the Atlantic.
Yeah, that's true, but you could say that about a few other teams that are struggling in the Eastern Conference as well. You still got to get it done on the ice, but I agree with you. I think the Lightning will emerge and rise up in the standings, get into the top 3, and it always comes down to the fact that they still have elite goaltending in Vasilevsky. He gives them a chance to win almost every game, and that makes a big difference. It gives that team a foundation to build upon, and just the way they've gone about it, beating the Carolina Hurricanes, a well-coached team that is never easy to play against. That is really big. And the power play, again, contributing the second goal by Tampa Bay, a Nicholas Paul power play tally.
To me, it's just the top end talent. Like Braden Point gets the winner, Nikita Kucherov all over the score sheet again, as he has been almost every night. But it's not like this is a team that hasn't gone through their ups and downs either. Tampa Bay Lightning had lost 4 games in a row going into that win against Carolina and had been outscored by 8 goals over that 4-game sample size. The power play is 1 for 9. Then they get 1 for 3 last night. So I'm just looking at this Tampa team and saying, wow, fired up for Thursday's game against the Boston Bruins. I bet you our host of Locked On Blue Jackets wishes both teams could lose, as their Blue Jackets are in a wild card spot.
Folks, it's January 8th, and the Columbus Blue Jackets are in a playoff spot. Jay Foster, Locked On Blue Jackets here. The Blue Jackets beat the Pittsburgh Penguins in Pittsburgh for the first time since the Obama administration. And because of that, they're in a playoff spot. Yes, it's the second wildcard spot. Yes, this competition is still very tight. Yes, it is what it is, but this is really exciting. The Blue Jackets haven't been in a playoff spot this late in the season since literally the COVID-shortened year. So January 7th, 2020, they had 50 points in 44 games and were almost in a playoff spot. This is kind of unprecedented at this point. Like, I don't really know what to do with myself talking about the Blue Jackets in the playoffs, but that's what we're going to do on today's episode. And we'll also break down tonight's really exciting win against the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's what's coming up on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
And there's Jay Forster from Locked On Blue Jackets. Just the best story going in the National Hockey League, Gil. I mean, we talked about it before the season too. How can you not be rooting for the Columbus Blue Jackets after all they've been through off the ice?
Yeah, to overcome the tragedy, the Johnny Gaudreau tragedy, and just all the things that entails, so close to the start of training camp, you would have thought it would have been easy to say, yeah, this team is just not going to compete this year. They're just going to be overwhelmed emotionally, and they're going to struggle as a result. But it's sort of had the opposite effect. They have banded together. They have played great team hockey. They're getting some really good individual contributions. And if they could ever get their goaltending sorted out, if Elvis Merzlikins could be a little more consistent, the Blue Jackets could be contending for a playoff spot in the East the rest of the way.
It's going to be a gauntlet in the Eastern Conference. We've talked about it so much, so why don't we dive into it even further? We've heard from Locked On Lightning and Locked On Blue Jackets, both teams right in the thick of it, holding down the 2 wildcard spots, and nothing here is going to change today. No team in an Eastern Conference wildcard spot is in action tonight. The Pittsburgh Penguins, they get their shootout loss against Columbus, so they still get a point. However, they've played the most games of any team in this situation. Ottawa gets their 1 point. They snap a losing skid as well. They hadn't scored a goal in 144 minutes before Thomas Chabot put one in the second period, so they get 1 point. They just finished a 9-game road trip, Gil, while the World Junior Championships were being played in the nation's capital in Ottawa. So it's even like we didn't even talk much about Montreal today, Gil. They're 8-2 in their last 10. They look like they're rejuvenated. Detroit, they're on their run. They're 2 points back. You could even go so far back, and the Flyers taking a regulation loss last night to the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's a big hit for them as they sit at 39 points. And, we'll talk about the New York Rangers a little later. They get 1 point, but frankly, it should have been 2. Which of these teams, Gil, do you think is a pretender that shouldn't be in the race?
Oh, wow. Out of all of these teams, I think Montreal is still like a year away. I like the progress they're making. They're not getting a lot of attention, and they probably deserve a little bit more than what they've been getting. But I still think that, it's a young, up-and-coming group, but there's probably still a year away from really being able to compete for a playoff spot. And the main reason I think that they're still in the thick of this competition is because there are just so many mediocre teams at the bottom of this Eastern Conference right now.
It's going to be fascinating to see the next month or two for the Montreal Canadiens. All their prospects that they're really excited about. I mean, there's a few. They've got one of the Rookie of the Year nominees for sure in Lane Hudson right now. But the Ivan Demidovs of the world are still coming. And I think with him, Michael Hage, even the goaltender Jacob Fowler, I'm really high on him. Until those guys get there, it almost feels like free money a little bit on the bingo card for the Habs this year. And Martin St. Louis, who faced a lot of heat in his market for their slumps earlier this year, wow, they look good. They beat the last 4 Stanley Cup champions in the course of the last week and a half. And their next game is against the 2018 Stanley Cup champions and one of the best teams in the East, the Washington Capitals. They'll take them on Friday. I'll just say the Philadelphia Flyers as mine. I know they're only 3 points out. They've played the same amount of games as Columbus, but to me, they're still a year away from being a real problem there. I just don't trust their goaltending enough. And look, I'm not saying the Columbus Blue Jackets are frauds, but they are going to have to improve on a 5-12-3 record on the road. You have to win on the road to make it to the playoffs, and that's not going to cut it. So they're doing well at home. It's great to see 13-5-3 at home, but they're going to have to improve on the road if they want to be a playoff contender.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That is the biggest disparity, home and road, among all these teams that are kind of bunched up here. Amazing right now that 7 points separate the second wild card and last place in the Eastern Conference. You go on a 3-game winning streak, and you can go from last place to a wild card spot practically, depending on how some of these other teams do.
And to just contrast that to the Western Conference, it's 17 points from the second wild card spot to last place. Now, Chicago's 4 points back of everybody. The San Jose Sharks at 32 points, still 13 points out of a playoff spot, just showing how tight things are in the Eastern Conference. But one team where it has not been good is the New York Rangers. On the other side, we'll dissect what's gone wrong in New York, and we'll hear from Locked On Rangers host John Chick.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. And folks, I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. The energy and excitement were just unforgettable. Well, now Game Time has made it even easier to get your tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And, one of my favorite features on the Game Time app is the view from your seat. You go on the app, and you get a panoramic view from your seat before you purchase the tickets, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
Welcome back, Locked On NHL. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me over at Locked On Ottawa Senators. Gil Martin with me from Locked On New York Islanders. You can find all of our local experts on the biggest stories 5 days a week all across the Locked On Podcast Network. Gil, what can you say about the New York Rangers this year? I mean, my goodness, a struggle would be a mighty improvement to what's been on the ice.
Yeah, I mean, here's a team that won the President's Trophy a year ago and just seems to have imploded this year. I mean, the talent is still there. The roster is, it's different. Obviously, there have been changes, but it's not so drastically different that you would expect them to go from President's Trophy winner to, battling to stay out of last place in the Eastern Conference. And last night, they just had another collapse at home, a game they were ahead 3-0 and ended up losing in overtime 5-4. So just really hard times. And I think this is a team that is their own worst enemy right now.
That's really what it feels like. The noise has been loud surrounding the New York Rangers. And to break it all down, here is John Chick.
Hey, what is going on, hockey fans? John Chick with Locked On New York Rangers, and the Rangers with a new candidate for toughest, most difficult to stomach loss of the season. They drop a home game against the Dallas Stars 5-4 in overtime, a game in which the Stars never once led, and a game in which the Rangers built a 3-goal lead. They gave it away. They got a 4-3 lead late in the game, and then they give that away too on just an, honestly, just unreal mistake by Keandre Miller. Just so lackadaisical, so out to lunch on this play. Gives the puck away, leads to the game-tying goal. I don't want to pin it on just one player because that's just not what we do here, but I will never in a million years know what was going on with Keandre Miller on that play. Sorry, I don't have really a nicer way to say it than that. There are other problems too. The Rangers, once again, forgot to defend for large chunks of this game, but we're going to be talking about all this on the next episode of Locked On New York Rangers. Do not miss it.
I was about to say I feel bad for John Gill, but he's seen a lot of playoff hockey since covering the team. So I'll just keep my mouth shut on that one, especially with all the noise around my team in New York earlier in December. So can't say I'm hoping they get back on track, but John does great work over there at Locked On Rangers.
He most certainly does. And yeah, I mean, look, I cover the Islanders. I can't say I'm hoping the Rangers get back on track either. I had to feel, though, for Jonathan Quick in that game. He faced a lot of shots. I think he played well enough to, look, he got them a point, but boy, they hung him out to dry at certain points in this game.
I'm just at a loss because on paper, the talent's there. It's just there's certain players, and it's come out now that Chris Kreider's been dealing with an injury for better parts of the entire season, but their top end players just haven't been that. Every time I open social media, I'm seeing another thing about how Mika Zibanejad is struggling. -19, only 8 goals in 40 games so far this season. I know that you're not expecting Adam Fox to be a goal scorer, but 1 goal in 40 games for a guy who has consistently been one of the best offensive defensemen in the National Hockey League. He scored 17 last year. He's at 1 through 40 games. It makes no sense to me. And they're still getting good goaltending. It's not like Igor Shesterkin's been the reason for their downfall. He's sitting at a .906. It's not up to his standard, but it's still NHL average. You shouldn't be giving up as much as they are when you're getting a goaltending performance like him night in, night out. Even Jonathan Quick's been respectable. He's probably played more games than anyone would have liked with the recent injury to Shesterkin. But, I mean, if I'm Chris Drury, I don't know how I'm diagnosing I don't know how to fix the problem, whether other than looking within and saying, all the guys who are here being paid millions of dollars, you guys are the ones that need to figure it out. They've made some peripheral moves. They bring in Arthur Kaliev off waivers. They make the Capo Caco trade. but nothing seems to be putting a jolt into this team the way they would have hoped. Not even Matt Rempe can get this team going, Gil.
Yeah, he came and then he got suspended pretty quickly, unfortunately for him. But yeah, this team just does not seem to have chemistry. They seem to be almost fighting each other. The locker room seems divided. There seems to be some players who support the GM, some players who do not. And unless they can get on the same page, like you said, the talent is there. They should be doing significantly better than where their record is at. But unless they can sort of find some cohesion and work together, this team right now is much less than the sum of its parts.
It's incredible to see. So let's just incredible from the standpoint of just the magnitude of the fall from President's Trophy winner. Not a whole lot of roster turnover, and then what we're seeing out there today. Any final thoughts on today's show, Gil? Anything else perk your attention around the National Hockey League this week?
You know, the other thought I had, and we talked about it a little bit before we went on air, I am really not happy as covering one of the teams that is in the thick of this wild card race in the Eastern Conference. Some games in this league are worth 3 points. Some games in this league are worth 2 points. I'm watching, Ottawa play, and then the one hope I have is please don't let this game go to overtime. And that's just not a natural thing for a fan to be doing. They either need to eliminate the loser point or go to a 3-2-1-0 system for games. It should be the same number of points being awarded in every game.
I don't disagree with you, and I find it interesting that it's coming from you because the Islanders have the most loser points in the league the last 2 years.
Yep. But, again, I think the loser points artificially keep the standings close, and that's why the league likes it. But at the same time, while 5 points sounds like a very small deficit, when there are 3-point games out there, it's much harder to make up those points.
That's just it. And if you go to that 3-2-1-0, where a regulation win is 3 points, overtime win is 2, then you keep the overtime loss at 1 and a 0 if you obviously lose in regulation. I just think that would give more incentive, because we also see sometimes when an East team plays a West team, the last 2-3 minutes of the game is, hey, let's just get a point and take our chance in overtime. You'd really get that emphasis on, hey, if we push here, we can really get ourselves ahead in the standings with a few extra regulation wins. So I'm all for that, Gil. I think that's a great point here, and we'll ride out on that. For now, we'll let you know that you can make your second listen, the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I mean, this is the time of year you need to be paying attention to Flip and Steal, because those guys are giving you all the waiver wire help as your team is getting set for the stretch run of the fantasy hockey season. You can also head to any of our local experts on the Locked On Podcast Network and get caught up in a 30-minute episode on what the latest is going on in their markets. For Gil Martin, I'm Ross Levitan. For us, you can find us on Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On Ottawa Senators, respectively. And tomorrow, we'll pass it over to our Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.